how do you see this Ukrainian counteroffensive so far? Is there any outcome for the Ukrainians?
Well, if we can talking about outcomes for Ukrainian side, it's definitely devastation. That's the only outcome that not just me, but basically almost everyone do see since the beginning of this counteroffensive. Just yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, for example, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu did release to public latest information that Defense Ministry has about previous months, for example, and stated that in July, Ukrainian forces did lost up to 21,000 soldiers killed and wounded, 2,200 different military equipment, different pieces of military equipment, including Leopard 2 tanks that was sent to Ukraine by NATO member states, M777 howitzers that was sent by USA, and many other types of equipment. So, and this is just the previous month. If you take in account, like in June also, when counteroffensive began, Ukrainian casualties will amount up to 45,000 killed and wounded soldiers and thousands more pieces of military equipment. So if this is not a total devastation as an outcome, at least for this moment, for this counteroffensive, then I don't know right word to use in this regard. So it's total devastation. I was saying for a very long time that Zelensky and his generals should reconsider. They were under pressure. I understand that Washington and London, they wanted some good news from Ukrainian battlefield, and they pressure Kiev to conduct such a counteroffensive, but it was so obvious that it will be a disaster for Ukrainian forces, and we are seeing now exactly that.
We know that they're executing some drone attacks inside Russia. Why they're doing that, in your opinion?
Well, just today, for example, in early hours of morning, Ukrainian side did conducted yet another drone strike on Moscow, for example, and according to Russian officials, 3 drones were launched in direction of Moscow. 2 was destroyed by air defense systems. 1 was suppressed by radio electronic warfare system. But unfortunately, as I understand, that drone that was suppressed by radio electronic warfare still managed to hit one of the high-rise office blocks in Moscow city. That's business part of the financial hub of Moscow. And, well, fortunately, there are no reports about casualties. But when it comes to reasoning behind it, well, first of all, I believe Zelensky and his associates, they want to probably generate some fear among Russians that no one is safe nowhere, even in capital. That may be one of the reasons. And second, that may be Zelensky's way to say that, well, we're still in the fight. So we did not lose this battle yet. And third reason, and there may be many more reasons, of course, but what is on surface, we can say that maybe Zelensky and his associates are hoping for heavy-handed retaliatory measures from Moscow, which will allow Zelensky then to ask for more weapons to NATO member states, more money, more financial aid, possibly. And who knows, maybe Zelensky and Kyiv regime will even manage to somehow influence decision-making process in some of the NATO member states who may at certain point even decide to participate in this conflict directly. Who knows? They may want to provoke even conflicts between Russia and NATO as a last hope to survive, because it's obvious that it's only a matter of time when Russia will end this conflict on its terms. There is no other way out from here.
As you mentioned, the level of casualties on the part of Ukrainian is huge in this counteroffensive. How many soldiers remained from those that were trained by the West?
Well, it's hard to tell for sure, but before this counteroffensive did began, we did had this leak information from US that were talking about some 10 to 12 approximately brigades that was trained by NATO member states for exactly for this counteroffensive. But if we take in account that that information could be misinformation also, and if we double that number, and if we will say, let's say Ukraine had 20 to 24, 25 brigades before in strategic reserves, then according to numbers that Russian Defense Ministry is providing, and if we will combine like numbers for June and July, it's mounting up to 40, 45,000 casualties, then it's becoming obvious that Ukraine already lost at least half of its strategic reserves. And in my opinion, right now, they may have 8 to 10, maximum 12, more or less battle-ready brigades that can be deployed in any one direction, no more than that. And this is strategic reserves that was kind of trained by NATO states. But yet again, when you see videos from battlefield, you kind of doubt that they truly receive any training whatsoever.
How do you see these troops? Are they well trained, or they're just some civilians that they receive some elementary training and sent to the battleground?
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking or trying to say, that even POWs, Ukrainian POWs that are in Russian captivity, they are saying that they only received some basic training. Some of them are saying that they only shoot like 30 rounds during 3 weeks of training. And the rest of it was some theoretical studies, and battlefield itself does highlights level of training, because there are so many videos when with some armored groups of Ukrainian forces are trying to conduct some offensive operation, and then some chaotic situation is beginning. These armored vehicles are running different directions. It seems like soldiers don't really know where to go, what to do, and well, because of this poor training, I believe casualties among Ukrainian offensive forces are so high. I don't really believe that they truly receive any significant training from NATO member states. And by the way, to be honest, I don't think many NATO member states do have a qualified enough military that has enough experience to prepare soldiers for type of battles that we are seeing on Ukraine now. So maybe NATO member states don't even know how to train for such a high intensity of battles.
Are they receiving these trainings from different countries? How's that going?
There are many countries that are participating in training of Ukrainian forces, from US and UK to Poland, Belgium, Denmark, you name it, France. And even though all those countries are NATO member states, military personnel of those countries have very different experience. We can say definitely that US Army are qualified enough to train any military personnel for any level of combat, but hardly we can say the same about, for example, Danish militaries that don't really have that much experience and never seen, basically, since the Second World War, probably such an intensity of battles like it is in Ukraine. Same goes for many other countries. So probably this one of the problems that Ukrainian forces are facing now is that these different units have been trained by different instructors in different countries under different tactical, how should I say, under different tactics, and maybe they are finding hard to communicate properly on the battlefield when they are participating in this counteroffensive. That's also maybe problem. Like also we can say that deliveries, as we know, of military equipment have been conducted by many NATO member states, and it's definitely logistical nightmare for Ukrainian army when one unit has in one brigade, for example, one unit has one type of weapons, second has a second type of weapons, third even different ones, and when it comes to battle itself, I cannot even imagine how they're going to deal with logistics of such a mixed weaponry. So probably that also plays some role in this failure of Ukrainian counteroffensive, these issues of logistics.
You know, before this counteroffensive started, they were talking about spring counteroffensive. Now they're talking about now it's going on it's going to the fall, going to the winter. How do you see this? Why they're changing their schedule?
Well, I believe Washington and London, they were desperate for some good news from Ukraine, and that's why they did began talk about this counteroffensive like 4 or 5 months ago, if I'm not mistaken, for quite a long time. And they were kind of hyping up society in the West that they're going to have some good news now. But there were many reports that Zaluzhny, for example, head of general staff of Ukrainian forces, was against this counteroffensive because he was thinking that Ukrainian armed forces are not ready. They don't have proper training. They don't have proper level of military equipment. But, well, I guess they were forced to conduct this counteroffensive anyway. And because they did that, this counteroffensive was failure, now we are hearing that this is just not even proper counteroffensive. To somehow justify themselves or not become under heavy critique, they are now saying that this is just a kind of recon operations, and real offensives or real counteroffensive will be sometime in the future. Its summer is almost gone. Today is 1st August, so I believe we will now hear more and more about fall counteroffensive, which will never happen because, as I said, Ukrainian forces probably have just half of its strategic reserves that they had before beginning of this counteroffensive. And to be honest, if Washington and London will allow Zelensky and his generals to hold this counteroffensive entirely and to begin defensive operations, then probably we would not see any further escalation from Ukrainian side. There will be no attempts even to conduct large-scale counteroffensive because, as I said, Ukrainian forces do have a huge problem, not just with military equipment and training, but also with manpower. And they will definitely try, in my opinion, and it seems logical to save these last strategic reserves that they have. But it all depends on position of Washington and London. Will they allow Zelensky to kind of postpone this operational pause that we are seeing now on the front lines? I doubt that they will allow Zelensky to do so, but only time will tell. But yet again, so many talks about this counteroffensive just because I guess Western elites want to justify all that military aid, all that financial aid, all that propaganda that they were conducting for many, many months. And they did not basically provide factual evidence that they had any success on the battlefield.
How do you see the goals of Russia? Do you think that Odessa, Nikolaev gonna be Russian?
Well, that's a question for $1 million. Well, I believe eventually, once this conflict will end, not just Odessa, not just Nikolaev and Odessa regions, but I believe Kharkov region also and Dnipropetrovsk region also will be at least entire southern and eastern parts of Ukraine, from Kharkiv to Odessa, will be under Russian control. I don't see any other way that Moscow will agree on any peace deal. because in these regions, first of all, they were basically historically parts of Russia. Odessa is built by Russian Empire. Same we can say about Kharkov, and these cities have a very different meaning. And population, they are Russian speakers, basically. A vast majority of population is a Russian speaker, and to avoid further escalation in the future, to make sure that Russian speakers are secure, I guess Moscow will try its best to secure entire southernest part of Ukraine from Kharkov to Odessa. But yet again, this is just my guess. So only time will tell. But eventually, I'm quite sure that yes, Kharkov, the Dnipropetrovsk region entirely same as Zaporozhye region, Kherson region, Nikolaev and Odessa will be under full Russian control, at least.
When this war started, everyone was thinking that this war gonna end so soon, but it didn't go the way we were thinking about. It seems that Russians have their mind and their schedule. How did you see the strategy of Russian army in this battle?
Well, to be honest, I guess not just in the outside of Russia, but even inside Russia, no one or very few probably did think that this conflict will continue for so long. I will probably be right if I will say that majority of Russian citizens probably did expect that that conflict, especially military operation, will end in very first weeks, maybe months. And to be honest, it was possibility. It was possibility. If you remember, in March there was negotiations. If I'm not mistaken, it was March or April. There was negotiations in Turkey.
In March.
And there are some reports that Ukrainian side did agree on certain terms to end conflict. And Russia did begin withdrawal of its forces from Sumy region, Chernigov region, from Kiev. And then Boris Johnson went to Ukraine, I guess, under orders
just before going to that, do we know any detail about those agreements, those papers that were signed by Ukrainians?
Yes, just recently, during one of the meetings, President of Russian Federation, Putin, did highlight some parts of that agreement that was partially agreed during negotiations. And in that document, Ukraine was staying neutral. There was quite specifics in that document, what kind of army Ukraine would be allowed to have, numbers of that army, security guarantees for Russian speaker, and just for everyone, basically, because many people probably think that it's just Russian speakers that are under pressure in Ukraine, which is not true. Ask Hungarian government. They know perfectly well that, for example, ethnic Hungarians in Transcarpathia also are under pressure, and many other ethnic minorities also. And in that draft document, rights of ethnic minorities also was guaranteed, and many, many other topics. But unfortunately, once some kind of agreement was reached in Turkey, when this delegation, Ukrainian delegation, went to Kiev, I believe Boris Johnson was the person that went to Kiev, then Prime Minister of United Kingdom, and everything has changed since then. And Kiev said no to its agreement to agree on peace with Russia, and since then we only see constant escalation of this conflict, unfortunately. But Russia was quite close, really, to achieve end of this conflict in March, in April. But unfortunately, it did not happen. And now it's truly hard to say how long this tragedy will continue, basically.
Levan, I think that one of the reasons that this battle is continuing is because the West is pouring a lot of weapons and money in Ukraine. And
yes.
How Putin can put an end to this war with all these weapons and money that goes to Ukraine?
Yes, I believe even Western experts are agreed that without Western financial and military support, this conflict could end in just a week or 2 weeks' time. This conflict is dragging on for so long just because of these heavy supplies of military equipment and finances from the Western world, which is, I don't think anybody can argue with this, even in Ukraine. Without Western support, this conflict would be end a long time ago. And by the way, I do see questions from audience, from members of community of my channel. Why Russia is not taking some decisive actions to end this conflict? And well, we can have many different answers and interpretations. After all, Putin and Russian general staff do not share their plans with all the plans with society, of course. But well, one of the reasons why Moscow is still trying to leave some gap for negotiations is because probably Putin still has some hopes that this conflict can be ended by negotiations with Western elites. That's why Moscow is not taking drastic measures. And this topic is becoming more and more active, for example, in Russia, because after all, even Moscow is not safe, and almost on a weekly basis now we are seeing strikes on Russian capital. But I guess, well, Russian leadership maybe are trying to leave some room for negotiations because they can be taken some level of steps after which there is nothing to talk about no more. So maybe that's why Russian side is not really stepping up level of intensity of battles. But yet again, I'm not military expert and I can be mistaken. But I get that feeling that maybe Putin and his inner circle still having some hopes that this conflict can be end soon with the beginning of negotiations. And that's why they are not intensifying this conflict more than it is now. But everything can change fairly soon. I don't know.
There are many signs that show us that Putin is not willing to kill Russians in large numbers, Russian soldiers. We know he's so conservative in this area because if you remember that mutiny by Prigozhin, he tried to solve it without killing anybody
Yes.
on the part of Wagner group I'm talking about. And
Yes.
this mindset continues with him in Ukraine.
Yes, because after all, one should always remember that we see Ukrainians as our brothers. And me personally, I did see this conflict as a civil war, as a conflict with elements of civil war, when basically brothers are fighting each other. And unfortunately, Western elites did manage to put this strange mindset in some parts of Ukrainians that we are enemies for them, and Russian language is enemy for them, and everyone who speaks Russian is enemy. When it's madness, isn't it? But unfortunately, and I guess that's why from the very beginning, Russian army was acting in a very careful manner. They were trying their best to minimize casualties among civilians. They were trying to avoid direct confrontation even with Ukrainian units when it was possible. But unfortunately, yet again, after that negotiations that was taking after negotiations in Turkey, when these negotiations break down, then unfortunately there was not really chance to avoid direct clashes, fierce direct battles between the sides. But I believe many Russians, including Russian leadership, are operating with this mindset that this is our brothers and we have to try our best to minimize casualties. Of course, when it comes to Russian side, Russian military personnel, we did see time after time this strategy of mobile warfare that Russia is practicing basically. And when there is any one position that hard to defend or will demand heavy casualties to be defended, then usually Russian side withdraws forces, regroups, and then establish control over those territories when time is, when there are better conditions for it. Very different approach from Ukrainian side when they are pouring in thousands and thousands of soldiers to try to defend undefendable positions, like it happened in Bakhmut, for example, which was a trap basically for Ukrainian army, and probably no one knows how many thousands of Ukrainian soldiers died to defend that undefendable positions in Bakhmut. So approach very different, yes.
We know the public opinion in Russia about Putin and this war. Their poll out there, we can check these polls. But on the Ukrainian side, we don't know how Ukrainians are feeling about this war. Are they supporting Zelensky administration or not? Nobody knows. Do we know anything about the public opinion in Ukraine?
Well, unfortunately, as we know, there is no independent media in Ukraine whatsoever. They are all under heavy scrutiny, under heavy censorship. Many opposition parties were basically closed, shut down. Many opposition politicians have fled Ukraine. They were forced to just flee Ukraine. But still, there's some information that coming out from this country. And for example, just yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, or day before, I was reading news about statements of a former aide of Ukrainian president, and he was even predicting that if Zelensky will continue on this path of canceling elections, canceling independent media channels, canceling opposition parties, then he is risking to provoke civil war inside Ukraine. So when I read this information, I was thinking to myself, well, if this person who is Ukrainian himself, former aide of Ukraine's president, former aide of Kuchma was president before in Ukraine, if he is saying that there are some risks of internal confrontation in Ukraine because of this behavior of current president, then must be opposition. There must be opposition, significant opposition in society. Otherwise, you're not going to get that kind of reading of picture that it's possible to ignite internal conflict if Zelensky would not stop. So that's one indicator that significant part of Ukrainian society is disagree with current policies of Zelensky and disagree with him. There are some reports in Russian media that Zelensky's rating it's about 15-20%. But yet again, this is we are in difficult situation. It's conflict between the sides, and we can take with pinch of salt any information from Russian media, let's say. But there are some other politicians also. For example, in Spain, there are blogger and politician Anatoly Shari. His name is, and maybe you are familiar with him. And just recently, he's also, and by the way, he's also he was forced to flee Ukraine also, and he was saying that Zelensky's rating, maximum of his rating is 20 to 30%. Just like a few weeks ago, he has posts on his Telegram about it, and he's in no way can be called pro-Russian. So I believe there is significant, I'm not going to speculate and say what percentage, but I do believe that significant part of Ukrainian society completely disagree with policies of Kyiv regime, and well, unfortunately, they have no say right now. They cannot influence situation, but if they were asked, they would probably oppose current policies of Kyiv.
It seems that Zelensky is not willing to have any election until this war ends. I saw that the mayor of Kiev said that he's willing to run. How do you see this?
Unfortunately, Zelensky is now like dictator. He has under martial law, his presidential institution has almost full control of all institutions in Ukraine. He can single-handedly do whatever he basically wants, and because his main supporters are Washington and London, as long as this is the case, he is untouchable. He can do anything he wants. That's unfortunate reality. But when it comes to perspective or future of Zelensky himself, I would not be sure that his future is bright, because it's only a matter of time when Washington and London will begin to think about changing reality on the ground in Ukraine. And I'm not sure about current mayor of Kiev. I don't think he's popular enough in Ukraine to be received as a possible major candidate as a next president of Ukraine or next leader. But even in Western media, if I'm not mistaken, even Politico was writing yesterday or the day before that in the West, some circles in the ruling elites are now discussing possible figures in the Ukraine that can be seen as next leaders of that country after Zelensky. And among them, there were few names were mentioned. That among them, one was Yermak, if I'm not mistaken, who is head of presidential office. But I can be mistaken. But he is closely associated with Zelensky. So there are some names already have been discussed in the West. So I don't think Zelensky is in a very good place, to be honest.
If not Zelensky, let's say somebody else. How is that gonna change anything in the Ukrainian foreign policy?
No. Unfortunately, as long as the Ukrainian ruling elite is controlled by West, we cannot hope for any significant changes when it comes to foreign policy. But one of the names that was discussed in that article in Politico was Zaluzhny, if I'm not mistaken. And the point is that if, for example, militaries will take over in Ukraine, that may kind of bring it closer to end this conflict, because military is not really very keen to fight, even though it's their profession. So there are some rumors that maybe, and as we know, a relationship between Zaluzhny, who is the head of general staff of Ukraine, and Zelensky, relationships are very bad. And if at some point this conflict has to end, isn't it? And we are seeing in the West, for example, article after article that Biden's administration, because of future elections, they are desperate not just for good news from Ukraine, but they basically need to end this conflict now. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for Biden and his campaign to justify everything that they did when it comes to Ukraine. And I don't think Zelensky and his inner circle is capable of conducting peace negotiations, or I don't think Moscow can trust them. Even if Zelensky will say tomorrow, okay, let's talk peace, is he can be trusted after what he did when negotiations was taking place in Turkey. So that's a big issue, and maybe because of it, Zelensky's presidency would not last even before end of this year, and he may be changed, and these new people, they may try to begin negotiations with Russia about ending of this conflict. That's a possibility. But when it comes to foreign policies, we can see conflict have been ended, which is on its own great deal. No people gonna die, which is should be number one priority, of course. But as I said, as long as ruling elites in Kiev will be controlled by London and Washington or Western ruling class, unfortunately, there always will be risks that situation may escalate yet again in any time in the future, because foreign policy would not change for sure, and Ukraine, basically part of Ukraine that will be controlled by EU regime will become probably like huge base of NATO. So Moscow not gonna be happy about it. So it's very difficult, very difficult.
Beside all these weapons, we have these billions and billions of dollars going to Ukraine, and they're paying everybody in Ukraine. They're going Zelensky administration from top to bottom.
Yes,
You know how, because Ukraine is just at the doorstep of Russia. You see the importance of Ukraine for Russia, the security of Ukraine for Russia. If the West stops sending money to Ukraine, Ukraine is a failed state. Doesn't work.
absolutely, absolutely.
How Russia views these problems inside Ukraine?
Well, as I said, even Western experts are not doubting that without Western financial support and military support, this conflict would not last even a couple of weeks. It will end. And when it comes to financial support, it's not just administration of president of Ukraine. Everybody in Ukraine, their wages, everybody from policemen and military personnel to high-ranking officials, their wages have been paid by those billions and billions of Western taxpayers that have been sent to Ukraine. So without financial assistance, entire system in Ukraine will just crash down under its own weight. And when it comes to view from Russia, well, as I said, here we all see Ukrainians as our brotherly nation, and well, if you I'm sure you are familiar with, for example, work that was done in Mariupol. There is many new blocks have been built in the city that was almost completely destroyed. And you're not going to see even a single person in Russia who will say, wait, I mean, you are sending millions and billions there. Why you are not spending this money here? No, because this attitude that this is our brothers, so we have to help them. So on whatever territories Russia will establish control, I'm 100% sure Russia will take care of social security of local residents, physical security of local residents. There will be done everything to make sure that economical activity on local scale will recover. It will take some time, of course, but to recover and to become sustainable. And by the way, we have good example for this because just recently, I believe Putin did sign the law to create free economical zones in all those 4 regions that become part of Russia after recent elections. And this was done exactly because of in attempt to create good enough condition, ground for local economies, for local economical activity, to become self-sustainable sometime in the future, not in the year's time or 2 years' time, but that's Russian approach. That's what Russians going to do. Whenever territory is going to become under control of Russia, you're going to see, just give it a year or two, you would not recognize those areas. In no ways. Social security, economical development, physical security, you name it. When Ukraine on its own, it's definitely failed state. It cannot sustain itself without, even for a month, to pay month's wages to its staff. It cannot do it without Western support. So that's why many in Russia are saying that we have conflict not between Russia and Ukraine, but we have conflict between Russia and Western elites, basically, that are using Ukraine as a proxy to somehow damage Russia, hurt Russia.
for Ukraine to have a viable economy, we have we know that eastern part of Ukraine that is now Russia, under the control of Russia, is the industrial part of Ukraine.
Yes.
The western part of Ukraine, what's its importance for their economy? What do they have there?
Uh, um, Agriculture, and not even agriculture, because one of the best agricultural lands in the world are also located on the central and eastern parts of Ukraine, majority of which is under Russian control now. And when it comes to industrial capacities, basically, whole Ukrainian economy was dependent on Donbass. Major factories, major productions of all type of goods was located on the eastern part. And it's not just a recent development, it was since Soviet Union. Kharkov, Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporozhye, great manufacturing cities. Mariupol also, of course, everyone is probably familiar with that immense, huge steel plant in Mariupol. When it comes to Western Ukraine, from economical standpoint, of course, they can generate some percentage of GDP, and did generate some percentage of GDP of Ukraine before this conflict started, but not in significant level, nowhere in significant level. Ukraine's economy is central and eastern Ukraine. Without it, Ukraine cannot survive as a state.
I don't know if you saw there is a website, privatization.gov.ua. It's the Zelensky administration put the assets of Ukraine on this website. They're sending something like more than $400 billion of, it's twice the GDP of Ukraine, almost twice
Yes,
the GDP of Ukraine. And we know, on the other hand, they're selling these farmlands to
yes.
foreign companies. How
Uh,
do you see this?
well, it's because of heavy censorship of media. Unfortunately, society in Ukraine not really informed about many topics, including attempts of Zelensky to somehow generate money by selling off Ukraine, entire Ukraine. Well, in reality, there are some rumors that BlackRock is, for example, this absolute giant, is heavily involved in Ukraine and plays huge part when it comes to Washington policies to continue this money supply and weapon supply, because they have huge interests in Ukraine. After all, Ukraine is potentially a very rich country when it comes to resources potential. But Zelensky may have many plans. He may want to sell off entire Ukraine, but investors will probably think twice before they will even, two investors, before they even invest one penny, because for now it's not yet clear how this conflict will end and which side will control which territories. And for me personally, it's absolutely, it's not questionable. It's not questionable that from Kharkov to Odessa, entire the territory will be under control of Russia. I do see a scenario in which even central parts of Ukraine, including Kiev, will be controlled under Russia, and western parts of Ukraine under Poland, Romania, Slovakia, and Hungary. So I do see scenarios in which there is no more Ukraine on political map. That's how bad everything can go for Ukraine if conflict are not stopped right now, before it's not too late. But and because of it, which serious investor gonna put money on the table in that kind of situation? Even if Zelensky is promising them to sell, I don't know, whole of Ukraine. I don't think so. Only giants like BlackRock, Monsanto, and that kind of companies, they may try to play around, but After all, I don't think they have a bigger influence than true rulers of Western world. They will be pushed away at some point, no matter how giant they are.
We know at some point we have to end this war. International community has to end this war, and one of the important issue in these peace talks, if there would be any, would be this trust between, or even verifying trust between Ukraine and Russia. We know that that wasn't the case, at least in 2014 and 2015, Minsk 1, Minsk 2, because guarantors of those agreements were Germany and France. They were cheating.
Yes.
They were cheating to build up Ukrainian military to confront Russia instead of making
Yes.
deals. And
Yes.
you see future deals, future agreements, if there would be any. Do you think that it's gonna have more countries like BRICS, like G7, to be part of this deal?
Undoubtedly, because I don't see a scenario in which Moscow will ever again trust Western states that were participating, for example, Minsk 1 and Minsk 2 agreements. How Moscow can trust them? There's no way. And by the way, because of this huge gap in trust, that's why I think that they are quite a high percentage of possibility that this conflict would not end before Russia will take control over the majority of Ukraine, except Western Ukraine, because of this lack of trust. Because I don't see how Putin can trust anybody in Ukraine or in the West, and unfortunately, BRICS member states, some of the BRICS member states were trying to participate, to push somehow narrative of peace talks. China, Brazil, South Africa, they were very active. India. But as long as Washington and London don't want to hear anything about peace, and as long as they are constantly escalating, unfortunately, BRICS member states or some other states will fail. And that's why I'm afraid Moscow will be forced, not because Moscow wants to, but Moscow will be forced to continue this special military operation as long as, how should I say, I'm afraid this conflict will continue until Moscow will establish control over the entire southeast of Ukraine, from Kharkiv or Odessa or even Kiev. There will be no Ukraine left. That's what I want to say. Ukraine is on the risk of losing its statehood, because I don't think Moscow truly has any other options on its hands already on this stage. We can be optimistic. We can talk about opportunities of peace and the rest of it. But you did mention very crucial point. Can Moscow trust? Moscow cannot. And that's why I'm afraid this conflict will continue until Moscow will establish control over entire Ukraine except western parts of it, which will become under control of some NATO member states that are bordering that western regions. That's my take on it. As you know, just in few days' time, there will be some peace talks in Saudi Arabia, for example. Russia was not invited, which is
what type of peace talk is that?
Exactly. I mean,
the owner is not there. I don't know.
Yes, I mean, what they're gonna discuss in that meeting, but unfortunately, very similar skepticism I will have about any other attempts to bring this conflict to the end, because of this total essence of trust between Russian side, total absence of trust between Russian side and the West or officials in Ukraine. They can sign anything, and next day they can act very differently, like they did many times before. So I'm afraid we are in this conflict will unfortunately continue until Russia will denazify and demilitarize the entire Ukraine, maybe except of that western regions, as it was declared from very beginning.
You think that denazifying gonna be achieved by?
Yes, it will take time. Germany was not denazified for 1 or 2 years. It did take decades. And I believe very same can be achieved in Ukraine. And after all, we should always remember that major core of these Nazi units and this Nazi grouping that are running Ukraine, they are all mainly all from Western Ukraine. Problem of Nazis and some extreme nationalists never occur in eastern or central parts of Ukraine. It's a phenomenon of Western Ukraine, like it was during Second World War when Ukrainian Nazis killed hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Jews, Poles, Russians, Ukrainians, even Belarusians, and so on. So,
Levan, beside these Nazis in Ukraine, we have these far-right Russians. We have Denis Kapustin, who has
yes.
a Russian volunteer corps. What do they want? They're fighting against Russians.
Yes, they are. Well, how should I put? They are failed individuals, lost individuals, basically. Many of these people were arrested in Russia several times, or they were under investigation because of their far-right extremist ideas. And, well, they failed here. They did not achieve much. And, well, they find that they are needed in Ukraine as a cannon fodder, as just manpower, really. And they are welcomed in current Ukraine. But if you want to know what Russians think about these groups, they are, for majority of Russians, they are not even known. Majority of Russian citizens don't even know about them, just anything, and don't care about them. They are nobody in Russia. But Western propaganda, Zelenskys regime, they are trying to hype up somehow this group of forces that conducted some PR action in Belgorod region quite a few times, and but in reality they're just nobody, really. I don't think
But
they can be taken seriously. They are failed people.
But their ideologies. What is their ideology? It's that like Nazis.
They are Nazis. Yes, they are Nazis. They are Nazis, and unfortunately, Nazis. You can see Nazis in almost every country, I believe, and Russia is not exception. And unfortunately, some percentage of degraded elements are here also, and because in Russia that kind of ideology is, I mean, nowhere welcomed. I mean, if anyone will act like conduct itself as a Nazi, he's going straight away to jail. No doubt about that. And these ones, they did escape to Ukraine because they feel it's a safe haven for them, which is true, by the way, which is true. Ukraine is safe haven for Nazis from all over the world. I believe just a few days ago in Germany, one of the media articles was writing that about some 60 German ultra-right elements that went to Ukraine for fight. Yet again, Nazis from all over the world are finding safe haven in Ukraine because they have the same crazy ideology that I don't even want to talk about. They're truly sick people. That's it.
Levan, thank you so much for being with us today.
We did have quite an interesting conversation. I hope your audience, your community will find it interesting. It was a pleasure to me and honor to participate in this program. So thank you very much.
It was my pleasure to have you on. We learn from because somebody that is living in Russia knows everything from the inside, and it's a great pleasure to have you on, and we really enjoy that.